Welcome in to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. Tell me if you heard these things before. The economy is a disaster. The economy is doing great. Inflation is out of control. Inflation is under control. Recession is coming. No recession in sight as earnings and jobs remain strong. Does all this sound familiar? Now, I'm saying this way because you've probably been hearing these types of things for months now. But just wait for the election season to heat up as the U.S. is entering a presidential election year. This year, 2024. Well, let's talk about the current state of the economy today. Before you go looking into tomorrow, let's talk about it today. But before we get started, make sure you smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. All right, let's get into it. So the first question we have to ask ourselves, let's just get right into it, right, is how is the economy really doing? Now, your view, right, might be formed by whoever controls the narrative you're listening to. So I want to kind of show you both sides, right? Let's start with inflation. So the latest monthly data on Consumer Price Index, or CPI, showed a 0.1% increase for the month of November 2023. This is the most recent data, by the way. Now, you compare that over 12 months, and the annual rate will be about 1.2% annualized. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's good, right? It's well below the target goal of 2% that the US Federal Reserve is shooting for. But if you exclude energy and food, we get a 0.3% for the month of November 2023. And on an annual basis, that's 3.6%. Obviously, that's above the 2% goal. As with all things, context matters. Now, looking at the same number for the last 12 months in the rear view mirror, if you will, you get 3.1% and 4% respectively. Now, if you use a different measurement statistic, like one the Fed prefers is the PCE deflator, which is the Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index. Yeah, say that 5 times fast. Now, for the same time period, November, right, last time the data was pulled, the monthly rate actually fell by a negative 0.1%. Now, by contrast, the core PCE deflator rose by 0.1%. So the trailing 12-month numbers come in at 2.6 and 3.2% respectively. Obviously, 1 month numbers don't reflect everything that's happening or the swings that occur each month. But strung together with over the last year, the pattern becomes more clear that inflation is on the decline and well off the peak of over 9% that was set in June of 2022. But look, it's still stubbornly above the 2% goal most global central banks have set, and most economists expect inflation to stay above 3% for the year ahead. So you might be thinking, okay, so wait, Brad, which number tells the real story and what will central banks do about it, particularly when it comes to interest rates? Again, depends on who's telling the story and what they're saying. So November and December's move in both stocks and bonds, I think, and we think here at the firm, showed investors believe the month's CPI rate shows inflation is below the target that the US Federal Reserve, and by the way, this is true of Canada and most banks, and they should lower short-term rates sooner rather than later. Now, belief is a narrative that can have, I think, profound influences on the markets. This is true of our life as well, right? So in thinking about that, let's talk about the labor market. What does that say about the economy? We just talked about inflation. How about labor? So looking at the latest data, job growth continues at a healthy pace. That's pretty clear. But looking closer shows most of the jobs are in the services sectors or increased government hiring. Now, negative revisions to early reports have also weakened the headline numbers. And in fact, employment numbers have actually been rived lower, and it occurred in 10 of the last 11 months. And jobs in manufacturing also remain subdued. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But wages continue to move higher as personal income rose about 4.4% in the US, which is wild to think about. And the unemployment rate remains low at 3.7%, well below historic norms. Now, Chairman Powell has been very vocal that wage growth needs to slow in order to show inflation is truly under control. Now, we may differ, by the way. I may differ with Chairman Powell on this point. But what about manufacturing and capital goods? So according to the ISM, which is the Institute for Supply Management, on the manufacturing index, the data shows a number of 47.4 for December. Now, a reading, just to be clear, a reading below 50 shows contraction in manufacturing. And the index has been below 50 since basically October of 2022, which is going on 14, 15 months now. Now, if you think about that in context here, as we talk about some of the things we're going to go into today, I think these numbers are starting to add up. And these numbers show, I think, a very different economy, one that is shrinking. So when it comes to PMIs, or Purchasers Managers Index, the strength has been on the services side, really what has kept the GDP positive for the last year. But here too, we're seeing a slowdown. I mean, with the US services PMI at 50.7, which basically having slipped below 50 in August, September, and October. So essentially what I'm trying to share is be careful with the narratives you choose. Don't get overly enthusiastic about markets, especially with the media in this year. They're going to try to spin it in certain ways. Looking and comparing data points with history can actually be helpful and informative. But these last 4 years, as we all know, haven't been really like any we've experienced before. The pandemic and closing of global economies obviously cause unintended consequences. I mean, we saw massive growth in money supplies, and stimulus spending is really still being felt as we slowly move back to normal behavior and adjust to the changes in things like work environments in particular, like work from home. I mean, small businesses have had to change how they operate and how they filled employment openings, and travel and entertainment has also changed. We don't just go to the movies, but rather watch them from home or on our amazing big screen TVs that we likely bought at a deal over the past couple of years. I mean, we're looking for experiences, I think, nowadays when we look at a marketplace, more than visiting a tourist site. We dine out, but also have the option of eating that same restaurant food at home with delivery companies like Grubhub, DoorDash, and others. Don't even get me started on those. If I see my budget my wife's spending on DoorDash and Grubhub anymore, I'm like, good Lord. And we haven't reached, by the way, what I'm trying to share here is we haven't reached the end of all the pandemic-related changes. But in our opinion, in many economists' opinion, we're getting much, much closer. I mean, economies are large and complex and cannot, be distilled down to one data point or even 3 or 4. By the way, news and mainstream media will make you feel like you can boil a global economy like the United States down to one data point. It's just not true. And to that end, recessions come and they go. Rates move up and they move down. Economies are resilient. A year ago, our firm, One Capital Management, we cautioned about focusing on the short term. And again, as I always do on our show, focusing on the long-term goals and strategies, right? So if you think about that, it's really important as you start this year off to keep that in mind, especially as you're listening to all the data points. I know it's data heavy today, but it's really important to kind of put it in context as you weigh, is that right or is that wrong? It's neither one of those. It's more of a context of taking both of them and looking at historical numbers. Hey, hope you enjoyed that today. If you did, make sure to subscribe to our show so you don't miss a single episode. And always remember to make your money matter.